BBC News. Hello, this is Jerry Smith. An Iranian security chief says the country's intelligence services knew about a plot to assassinate a top nuclear scientist, but they were still unable to save him. Iran has blamed Israel for Friday's killing of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. Alan Johnston reports.
This assassination was a major humiliation for Iran. Its enemies managed to target and kill a key figure in the heart of the country. Now a security chief, Rear Admiral Ali Shamkhani, has conceded that Iranian agents knew there was a plan to assassinate the scientist. They even knew where the attack might come. But Mr. Shamkhani said the intelligence services still couldn't thwart it because the killers used such new and sophisticated methods. He said the killing had involved electronic equipment and that no assassins were present at the scene.
The leader of the TPLF forces in Ethiopia's Tigray region says his troops are still fighting against the military near the city of Mekelle, which was seized by government troops over the weekend. Ethiopia's Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, has told Parliament not a single civilian had been killed in the nearly month-long offensive, something the TPLF politicians in the Tigray region have strongly disputed. Here's Will Ross.
The two sides in Ethiopia's war are giving very different accounts and dismiss each other's statements as propaganda. In a speech to Parliament, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed described the military as disciplined and victorious. He then castigated the TPLF politicians, accusing them of being behind more than 100 ethnic and religious conflicts that have flared up since he came to power 2.5 years ago. The leader of the Tigray region, Debretsion Gebremichael, is still talking tough and says fighting continues near the regional capital, Mekelle. It's impossible to verify what's happening or to know the toll the fighting has taken on the civilian population.
4 French police officers accused of beating up a black music producer at his studio in Paris last week have been put under formal investigation. A judge will look at allegations that the officers racially abused Michel Zecler, which they deny. Japan's Crown Prince Fumihito has given his approval to his daughter's much-delayed plan to marry her boyfriend, which was supposed to take place 2 years ago. Here's Michael Bristow.
The approval of the man who's next in line to the Japanese throne appeared a little less than wholehearted. He said the constitution pointed out that marriage should be based on the consent of the two parties, and as a parent he would respect that position. It's thought the marriage of Princess Mako and her boyfriend Kei Komuro, who's not a royal himself, was postponed because of a financial dispute involving his family. That doesn't appear to have been resolved, but the princess recently said she wants to go ahead with the wedding.
World News from the BBC. The US President-elect Joe Biden is due to receive his first presidential daily briefing later today as the handover of power takes another step forward. The classified briefing comes after several weeks of the Trump administration refusing to provide the information required for the transfer of responsibility for the most sensitive intelligence. The president-elect has also named more members of his administration. Hungary's right-wing Prime Minister Viktor Orban has launched a verbal attack on Germany in the latest argument over Hungary's current veto of the European Union's 7-year budget. In a letter to rebut criticism by the German former European Parliament President Martin Schulz, Mr. Orban said Germany made money from Hungary's membership of the EU single market. He denied Mr. Schulz's allegations of anti-Semitism. More than 4 years after the Brexit referendum, the British government has outlined what it says is the most significant change to England's agricultural policy for more than 50 years. Here's Roger Harrabin.
For decades, the UK has been locked into a controversial EU system under which farmers are given grants based on the amount of land they own. The richer the farmer, the bigger the landholding, the more taxpayers' money they get. British governments have never liked it, and Brexit brings the opportunity for change. In future, grants will no longer be linked to land area. Payments will be given instead for activities that benefit society, such as planting trees, encouraging wildlife, and capturing floodwaters on farmland.
Roger Harrabin. The Bosnian capital Sarajevo is recovering from a weekend of severe air pollution. Measurements released by the US Embassy show the air quality index peaked at 370 at 10 p.m. on Saturday. Above a reading of 300, people are advised to stay at home. And those are the latest stories from BBC News.
It's 13:06 GMT. You're listening to the newsroom on the BBC World Service with me, Valerie Sanderson. In Tehran, a state funeral has been taking place for the prominent Iranian nuclear scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh after his assassination on Friday. His coffin was carried by the military in procession through the streets of the city and met at the mosque by a large crowd of mourners. Speaking at the funeral, the country's defence minister Amir Hatami accused the United States and Israel of hypocrisy over Iran's nuclear programme.
The criminal United States has thousands of nuclear weapons, and the criminal Zionist regime has hundreds of nuclear weapons. What are these weapons for? Are these weapons for use as home decor?
Well, an Iranian official has also said that the intelligence services knew about the plot to assassinate the nuclear scientist beforehand, but were unable to stop it. Well, Gia Gall of BBC Persian joins me now live on the newsroom. Gia, tell us more about what they're saying about what they knew about this plot.
Well, since Friday, we have been hearing many different scenarios how this assassination was carried out. Some say they have seen 12 people with machine gun and stormed and with the explosion. But now we are hearing from the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, Ali Shamkhani. He said there was no one present at the scene. In fact, they have been using sophisticated and special methods using electronic equipments actually to carry out this assassination. And also actually the Fars News Agency, which is very close to Iranian Revolutionary Guards, he said the assassins have used remote controlled machine gun. And Iranian state English television, Press TV, claimed the weapons have been discovered in the scene, has a hallmark of Israeli military industry, and even the bullet is from there. But we have heard from Israeli, the head of the Mossad, they said they have no knowledge about this assassination. As I said, there is so many theories and scenarios coming out, but it seems it has been very sophisticated, and he was assassinated in a very strategic, actually, location near Tehran.
And Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, he's just been buried. Was that a big occasion? I mean, what was the feeling from the crowds about it?
Well, obviously, there has been numbers of gathering in front of different ministry. They calling and shouting should not negotiate. They should take revenge and also continue his career, what he has done and what he did for Iranian nuclear programs. But today, the committee which was organizing the ceremony, they said because of the COVID-19, they wouldn't have a big gathering. Obviously, the ceremony was conducted in the capital, Tehran, in the Ministry of Defense. Only high-ranking officials and military commanders and the intelligence service and the family of the Mr. Fakhrizadeh participated in the ceremony, and then his body and his remains actually was moved to a cemetery in north of Tehran. It was buried there.
Thanks, Gia Gall there. The relationship between China and Australia was already strained, but it's now plunged to a new low with the tweeting of a fake photo on a Beijing government account by a Chinese official. The image appears to show an Australian soldier holding a bloodied knife to the throat of an Afghan child. Written beneath the words, "Don't be afraid, we are coming to bring you peace." Well, it was clearly a reference to a recent report by the government of Australia, which said there was evidence that some of its special forces had unlawfully killed at least 39 civilians in Afghanistan. The Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has responded to China's actions with fury.
It is utterly outrageous, and it cannot be justified on any basis whatsoever. The Chinese government should be totally ashamed of this post. It diminishes them in the world's eyes.
But China retorted it was Australia that should be ashamed.
The lives of Afghans matter. The Australian government should do some soul-searching and bring the culprits to justice and offer an official apology to the Afghan people and make the solemn pledge that they will never repeat such crimes.
I asked our Beijing correspondent Steve McDonald for more details.
The obvious answer is that it's some sort of further shot across the bow in the ongoing diplomatic battle between Canberra and Beijing. Now, Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying said today that that wasn't the case, that this is actually a separate issue, but I can't imagine that any serious observer would see this outside the current recriminations. Australian government has referred to this as a fake image. It's certainly doctored or it's computer generated, but the Chinese government is, what they are saying is, we didn't intend to deceive people. It's kind of a political piece of imagery designed to criticise these war crimes conducted by Australians in Afghanistan. Now, when we asked, what do you make of these comments by the Australian government, that you should be ashamed, and they're saying, well, no, it's not us that should be ashamed, it's you that should be ashamed. And I think that Beijing thinks it's on a bit of a winner here. I mean, Hua Chunying, she rhetorically asked today, what, has the Australian military conducted such terrible crimes in Afghanistan? Have they killed people in this cold-blooded way? And it does seem to be that all the evidence would suggest that there have been such killings in Afghanistan. And so, on the one hand, we have the political element of this between China and Australia, but on the other, what the Chinese government knows is that on the ground in Afghanistan, these awful war crimes do seem to have been committed.
Stephen McDonnell. Phone lines and internet connections remain cut off in Ethiopia's Tigray region, where fighting between the anti-government TPLF forces and the Ethiopian military sent there by Addis Ababa is said to be continuing. The Ethiopian army says it seized the regional capital Mekelle over the weekend, but now the leader of the TPLF says his troops are still resisting. They're also reported to have retaken Axum city. Well, our Africa regional editor Will Ross joins us live. It's pretty confusing. Well, I mean, what do we know for certain?
Well, it seems certain that Mekelle, the regional capital, was taken over the weekend. The TPLF is not denying that, and they are saying that fighting is still continuing, though, near to that city. The leader of the TPLF, Debretsion Gebremichael, said that the fighting was going on, and he's clearly sounding confident that the war is not finished. But we're getting a completely different story from the government side. The Ethiopian Prime Minister has given a long address to Parliament where he's basically spoken of victory and congratulated the troops, at one point saying that no civilians had been killed, something disputed by the TPLF side. And interestingly, he also said that the government knew where the TPLF leaders had fled to. He said they'd gone west of the city of Mekelle, and he said they would soon be attacked.
So the Ethiopian Prime Minister is saying no civilians have been hurt. I mean, do we know what's happening to the civilian population?
It's very difficult to know because all the communication links have been cut off, phone lines and internet down. We know that they have been suffering during this month because some services have been blocked. That's on a basic level. What we don't know is how much damage has been caused to their properties and how many people have been injured or killed. We know from the tens of thousands who fled over the border to Sudan that many of them were fleeing appalling atrocities, including bombings, but they talked about, knife attacks and people being attacked in their homes by gunmen. But it's not clear. The border, we understand, was blocked at some point by Ethiopian soldiers, possibly not wanting more news to spill over the border. But it is very difficult to know the true extent of how much this has really hurt the civilian population. But there are fears that it could morph into a more kind of guerrilla-style conflict, going on in the mountainous, rugged terrain of Tigray region, which has had conflict fought there that's gone on for a long time before. And some of these TPLF fighters will know the terrain well, but we simply don't know if this is, going to come to an end quickly, as the government says, or is going to go on for a long time and cause a bigger humanitarian crisis.
Well, Ross, you're listening to the newsroom. Jerry has the headlines this hour.
An Iranian security chief has said that the country's intelligence services knew about a plot to assassinate a top nuclear scientist, but they were still unable to thwart it. As we've been hearing, the government and rebel regional authority in Ethiopia's Tigray province are issuing conflicting accounts of the fighting there. And 4 French police officers have been charged with using unlawful force following the beating of a black music producer in Paris.
It's the oldest continuous monarchy in the world, and the chrysanthemum throne commands huge loyalty in Japan. Now, Crown Prince Akishino is reported to have approved his daughter's long-postponed plans to marry her university boyfriend. Princess Mako's marriage to a commoner means she'll lose her imperial status and official financial support, and her exit will diminish the already small royal family. Our correspondent in Tokyo, Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, told us more.
Princess Mako is the older sister of the little boy who one day will become the Emperor of Japan, and she is the daughter of the current Crown Prince. So she's very close to the royal lineage. And so, what happens to her, who she marries, is of interest to everybody.
So tell us why she hasn't married her fiancé until now, because it's been a long run up to the altar, hasn't it?
Her fiancé, who is her university sweetheart, proposed to her first back in 2013. It then took until 2017 for them to formally announce their engagement. But a short time later, they then decided to put it on hold, and it's been put on hold again until today, with the final announcement from her father, Prince Akishino, that he approves of them going ahead and getting married. Although even today, I have to say, Prince Akishino was not filled with enthusiasm about this marriage, and he has said they are still to decide on a date for this wedding to happen. So there is certainly things going on in the background here as to why this has been delayed and delayed and delayed. And I think it has to do with the fact that Prince Akishino and the royal family in general are perhaps not overwhelmed by her choice of marriage partner. Her fiancé, Mr. Komuro, comes from a not wealthy family. He is still a student at the age of 29, studying for the New York bar. His family has had financial difficulties, and I think it is sort of the possibility or even the scent of a possible financial scandal.
And yet, on her marriage, basically Princess Mako exits the royal family, doesn't she, in an official sense?
Specifically for females in the royal household, when they get married, they leave the royal household, they become ordinary citizens, and they lose all their titles and their financial support. And so for Princess Mako, the issue is finding a suitable partner for someone who was born a princess, and this is a real problem. It's not just her. There are very few people, to put it bluntly, who really want to marry a member of the Japanese royal household.
Rupert Wingfield-Hayes. Health and safety authorities in New Zealand have filed charges over the deadly White Island volcano disaster a year ago. 22 people died and others were badly injured when it erupted last December, engulfing many tourists. 10 organisations face charges under health and safety laws, along with 3 individuals. From Sydney, Phil Mercer reports.
A wave of ash and rock is how one survivor described the impact of the White Island eruption in New Zealand's Bay of Plenty. Steam and gas had ignited an explosion, blasting debris into the air. There had been signs of seismic activity for weeks before the disaster, but the sudden nature of the eruption took everyone, including the authorities, by surprise. Almost a year later, 13 organisations and individuals have been charged with health and safety offences. They've been brought by WorkSafe New Zealand, the official safety regulator. Its chief executive is Phil Parks.
This deeply tragic event was unexpected, but that does not mean it was unforeseeable. The victims, both workers and visitors alike, all had a reasonable expectation that they could go to the island knowing that those organisations involved had done all they were required to do to look after their health and safety.
The defendants haven't been officially identified for legal reasons, but reports say they include New Zealand government science and emergency agencies, along with a tour guide company. An initial hearing will be held next month in the Auckland District Court. Tourists haven't been allowed back to the island since the tragedy. White Island is New Zealand's most active volcano.
Phil Mercer, and Jerry has some other stories from our news desk.
The US pharmaceutical company Moderna says it will apply for emergency use approval for its coronavirus vaccine after the latest trials indicated very high levels of protection against COVID-19. The firm said the phase 3 trial analysis showed an efficacy of 94%. Palab Ghosh reports.
Moderna's analysis of data from its clinical trials will provide further encouragement that its vaccine is viable. It shows that none of those vaccinated became seriously ill and indicated that the injection was equally effective across all ages and ethnic groups that participated in the study. This included people who identified themselves as Hispanic, Black, Asian American and multiracial. The company also confirmed that there were no serious side effects, although there were reports of fatigue, headaches and redness at the injection site.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi says controversial agricultural reforms recently introduced by his government are in the interests of farmers and will benefit them. He dismissed concerns about the reforms as propaganda. Thousands of farmers who are staging a protest on the outskirts of the capital, Delhi, say the reforms will leave small farmers at the mercy of big buyers. The British pop star Rita Ora has apologised after she threw a birthday party at a restaurant in West London on Saturday night. Newspapers have published pictures of the celebrity arriving with a number of other people at the event. Writing on Instagram, the singer said she had wrongly thought it would be okay because lockdown was ending.
While the world focuses on the coronavirus, other diseases continue their deadly march. Every 2 minutes, a child dies of malaria, and now the World Health Organization is warning about a shortage of funds for anti-malaria programs, which has been exacerbated by the cost of combating the pandemic. Our correspondent in Geneva, Imogen Folks, told me more.
The good news is that so far, and I stress the word so far, the COVID-19 pandemic has not disrupted malaria prevention and malaria treatment. But so far, the WHO suggests that were even 10% of the prevention campaigns to be disrupted, this could lead to thousands and thousands of additional deaths. The real problem that we're looking at with malaria is that we saw a real momentum in malaria prevention and control and eradication even between the year 2000 to around 2015. And then somehow, perhaps encouraged by the success, it's fallen off. And so the case numbers over the last 3 to 4 years are not really decreasing. The death toll is not really decreasing either. And that is the real alarm bell that the WHO, I think, is sounding today. Because, you know, the goal of eradication is there to be achieved, but not if we forget about this disease, which, as we know, I mean, causes devastation, far more deaths than something like Ebola or something like COVID-19.
I mean, how much devastation does it cause?
We were looking at over 400,000 deaths a year over the last couple of years. Now, most of those, let's remember, are young children. We have 230 million cases a year for the past 4 years, or almost 230 million. So massive health and economic consequences, even if you don't think about the death toll. A child dies of malaria every 2 minutes.
A malaria vaccine is being piloted in 3 African countries, isn't it, at the moment? Is that the way ahead?
It's one of the ways ahead. I think there's a lot of hope. And up to September, almost 500,000 children had been vaccinated. The first signs are that it is really working quite well. But let's remember, this is a preventable disease, also by other measures. The basic insecticide-treated mosquito net, the funding for those basic measures that we know work is falling. There's a big $2 billion funding gap for 2019.
Imogen Folks. Now, put together Irish music and punk, and you get the Pogues, the Anglo-Irish band which rose to fame back in the 1980s and early 90s. Over the years, their singer, Shane MacGowan, has become as well known for his rabble-rousing and battles with addiction as for his songwriting. A new documentary, Crock of Gold, aims to examine all the facets of his life. Colin Patterson has been speaking to its director, Julian Temple.
God looked down on this little cottage in Ireland and said, that little boy there, he's the little boy that I'm going to use to save Irish music.
Crock of Gold was in theory made with the cooperation of the folk singer Shane MacGowan, but on screen he shouts at the crew, ignores questions, and according to the director Julian Temple, would often simply not turn up.
I don't think anyone would deny that Shane can be difficult. We luckily had a lovely time in Tipperary, waiting for probably 3 days there, and we had the fire lit, everything ready. He was 5 miles away, and he turned back at the local town.
Shane MacGowan was actually born in Kent and attended Westminster School in London, where 6 British Prime Ministers were educated. Crock of Gold explores how he immersed himself in his Irish heritage.
I think there's an incredible energy from the contradictions within Shane, the fact that he was a public school boy and then was, for a while, one of the most notorious of London street punks. Bringing some respect and some kind of hip attitude back to not just Irish music but Irish culture in the 80s. He talks about it almost as a crusade.
In the film, Shane MacGowan goes as far as to say he would have joined the IRA if he'd had the guts. One of the interviewers who elicits the most coherent responses from him is the former Sinn Féin leader, Gerry Adams.
Your songs broadened our sense of ourselves. Redemption, sorrow, the ordinary person's story.
How did that come about?
Shane's people suggested Gerry. It's someone Shane has had a relationship with. Obviously, Shane, I didn't realise how much of a deeply Irish patriot he is. So, that was an area that we did want to explore because it's so important in Shane's songwriting.
I think some people might be surprised to see Gerry Adams doing interviews in a pop documentary.
Some would, some wouldn't. I think the point of film is to surprise and enlighten.
The lyrics are always about fighting, drinking, dying, living. The things that everybody does.
And one other thing of note. A late decision has been made that for this week's cinema release, Shane MacGowan will be subtitled.
In the end, it's a decision for the distributors. The strange mixture of Irish and English. It's an acquired listening skill, I think, sometimes with Shane.
Shane MacGowan, subtitled for the British. What he makes of that would make interesting reading on Subtitles.
Colin Patterson there. And the main news this hour. An Iranian security chief says the country's intelligence services knew about a plot to assassinate a top nuclear scientist, but they were still unable to thwart it. You've been listening to The Newsroom. Bye for now.
And there we leave our programme.